Hello and thank you for joining us today. I am Garima Batra, Content Marketing Specialist at cloudlimbs.com, and I'm excited to moderate this event. In the next 30 minutes, our speaker, Martha Hernandez, will discuss the importance of informed consent in clinical research. She will explain the elements for writing informed consent effectively to meet regulatory requirements and protect the rights and privacy of participants at all times. Now, let me quickly introduce Martha. Martha is a scientist at cloudlimbs.com. Before beginning her professional career as a scientist with us, Martha spent 12 years working as an analytical chemist in various industries from clinical diagnostics to forensics in Mexico. Martha loves to attend trade shows as she gets an opportunity to meet and interact with new people and thought leaders from different industries. Getting the job done in less time is a priority for her personally, as there was a time when she would spend over 14 hours per day manually filling in the logs and typing the results, wasting valuable time and making mistakes due to exhaustion. When she's not traveling for work, Martha loves to dance and play with her pups, Homer and Benito. Martha loves to pose with her pups and share pics on her social media accounts. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few points so you know how to participate in today's webinar. All attendees will be in mute mode throughout this webinar. This is an interactive webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions anytime during the presentation by entering them in the chat box. The questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We will take as many questions as time permits, but we do want to end today's presentation on time. So if we are unable to answer your questions today, we will get back to you on email. Now let's welcome Martha.
Thank you, Garima, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Martha Hernandez. I'm a scientist at Cloudlimbs, and today I'm going to talk to you about something that is really important in clinical research, and that is the informed consent. I will give you some tips to manage this important process a little bit easier, from paperwork to practice. So first, let's take a look at the market right now. So according to the latest projections, the global clinical trials industry is expected to grow from $57.76 billion in 2023 to $92.45 billion by 2030, at a compound annual growth rate of 6.9%. And well, that's a big growth. It has been growing exponentially, this industry. And this is because companies have been keen to increase their focus on developing new treatments for chronic diseases. So according to the World Health Organization, clinical trials are a type of research that studies new tests and treatments and evaluates their effects on human health outcomes. So this is the official definition for clinical trials. But we know also that these are a type of clinical research that is governed by an established protocol to respond to a precise patient care query, and that each trial is attached to a procedure that defines what types of people can participate in the study. So people volunteer to participate in clinical trials to test several medical interventions such as drugs, and biological products, surgical procedures, radiological procedures, devices, behavioral treatments, and preventive care. So these clinical trials are carefully designed and reviewed. They must be approved by a lot of people, including Committee of Ethics, regulatory authorities, and some other persons before they can start. And well, also people of all ages can participate in clinical trials. But we know that it's not easy. Research in humans or research involving human samples requires the prior consent of the participant or donor or subject. So, in order to conduct any research involving human subjects, the participants involved must provide informed consent beforehand. So this process ensures that the subjects fully understand the nature of the study and willingly agree to participate. So what is informed consent? I will give you the official definition of the International Council for the Harmonization of Good Clinical Practices, and this is a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his/her/their willingness to participate in a given trial after having informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the decision of the subject to participate. So here it is important to say that is a whole process. It is not only a piece of paper. It involves a lot of steps and it's a whole process. Okay, just to be clear on that. Because, well, to ensure that informed consent that has been obtained, or a written document must be complete, must be signed, must be dated by the subjects to confirm their understanding and agreement to participate in the study. And this is the informed consent form. So the informed consent form must be written in a language that can be easily understood by the subject. This is because sometimes, or most of the times, the participants are not involved in the healthcare industry. They don't know these big words of medical terms. So you have to write it in the most understandable way. So also you have to minimize the possibility of undue influence and giving sufficient time to the subjects to consider their participation. Sometimes they don't understand the informed consent form at the first time, so they reread it 2, 3, 4 times. Sometimes they have questions. They ask questions and you must answer them. So you have to ensure that the participants understand the risks and purpose of the study, and also the researchers can obtain consent from the participants electronically as well. So it's not necessary to be in paper anymore. You can do it from a laptop, mobile, tablet, or whatever you want. So there are several guidelines that, well, in several regulations that regulate this informed consent process. And I will talk to you, and will mention some of them here in this presentation. And first, it's the common rule. This is a set of regulations governing research involving human subjects in the United States. So I will take some key points of the common rule later in this presentation. The other one is the Office of Human Research Protections, or the OHRP. So this outlines the elements that must be included in the informed consent process and includes providing information about the nature of the study, the risks and benefits of participation, the alternative options, the confidentiality protections, and also the right to withdraw from the study at any time. There is another one, and it's the FDA Regulations 21 CFR, and this outlines the requirements for informed consent, and specifically it states that the documentation of informed consent can be waived under certain circumstances, such as when the research presents minimal risk to the subject, the waiver will not adversely affect the subject's rights and welfare, and the study cannot be practically carried out without the waiver. There are some other regulations. For example, in Europe, there is the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, and the Clinical Trials Regulation, or the CTR. So the GDPR outlines the requirements for obtaining informed consent from the processing of personal data. And this includes all the health data collected during the clinical trials, could be clinical history, could be lab results, could be any information that has been collected in this clinical trial. And the CDR sets specific requirements for obtaining informed consent in clinical trials, including the need for information to be provided in a clear and understandable manner, and the requirement for consent to be freely given. And another requirement is the consent to be documented in writing. And in Australia, the regulation governing this informed consent process are set out in the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Human Research. So the National Statement requires that the information about the study be presented in a manner, again, that is clear and understandable to the subject, and that the subject be given adequate time to consider their participation and ask questions, and that consent be voluntary and able to be withdrawn at any time. And it also provides additional guidelines for obtaining informed consent in special situations, such as research that involves vulnerable populations, or the research that is conducted in emergency situations. So in this webinar, I will explain about the elements for writing informed consent effectively as per the FDA and the Common Rule guidelines. So we will start the informed consent document, or the informed consent form, with an introduction. It's kind of obvious, but you have to take into account that you have to explain why the potential participant might or might not want to participate in the research, and you have to present the key information concisely. So it's the first part of your document, so you have to be really direct and, well, to attract the attention of the participant and be really clear with this, I don't know, 4 or 5 lines that you're going to write as introduction. The next one will be purpose. And well, the purpose is you have to include a statement that the study involves research. You have to add that word. And you have to explain of the purposes of the research that can be easily understood by the subject. You're not going to put all the introduction of your protocol or all your abstract and introduction of your paper. And no, you're going to summarize all that information and put it in words that can be easily understood for everybody. And also you may add the expected duration of the individual's involvement in the purpose of research. And this is important because it will be the first question that the subject will ask you. How long I will be here? How long it will take to finish all the, I don't know, to take the samples, for example. Should I will come back later to take another sample? Or, well, he has to know exactly how many days, how many months, years he will spend in this research trial. Next element will be risk, discomforts, and benefits. So the researcher should describe any reasonable risks or discomforts to the subject that they may experiment during the trial. For example, injections or frequency of the blood test, or maybe backache to be if it needs to be seated for many hours, or any risk discomforts that can be included in your trial. Well, you have to add it in here in risk and discomforts. But also you should describe the benefits to the subject or to others that can be expected from this research. Also, the researchers must provide insights of appropriate alternatives, procedures, or course of treatment, if there's any, that may be advantageous to the subject. This must include advantages and disadvantages of the alternatives, and you have to allow him the opportunity to choose between participating on the study or in the alternatives. The next point will be confidentiality. So in seeking informed consent, researchers must include a statement describing the extent to which confidentiality of records identifying the subject will be maintained, and also the subject must know that there is a possibility that the FDA may inspect these records. So he can choose if he continue or not. If the investigation involves more than minimal risks, an explanation should be included as to whether any compensation or medical treatment is available if any injury occurs. So this is really important because the subject must be informed of what the compensation consists of or where more information can be obtained. So he has to be really informed about this because it's too important. You have to add it in the informed consent form so he can choose if he wants to participate or not. And well, voluntary participation. The subject must be aware that their participation is voluntary and that they can withdraw from the study at their pleasure without being penalized, and also that they have the right to refuse participation and will not lose the benefits. So no coercion in this research, everything is voluntary. Well, the informed consent document must include the following statement. A description of this clinical trial will be available on clinicaltrials.com as required by U.S. law. This website will not include information that can identify you. At most, the website will include a summary of the results. You can search this website at any time. So this will notify the subject that the clinical trial information will be submitted for inclusion in the clinical trial registry database pursuant to paragraph J of Section 402 of the Public Health Service Act. Well, in case these basic elements were not enough to build your informed consent form, we have given ourselves the task of listing additional elements that, according to the FDA and the common rule, should be included. But, well, these additional elements may or may not apply at the discretion of the institutional review boards. So we recommend that the sponsor of clinical trials contact the IRB to find out which ones apply. First, let's start with the first one. This is for pregnant subjects. A statement disclosing potential risks to themselves or a developing fetus. So if you have any pregnant subject, you have to add here this a statement that explain all these unexpected risks. And you have to include the reasons why the investigator may terminate the study on the subject's participations, regardless of informed consent and willingness to participate. For example, on compliance with trial requirements or changes in laboratory values outside the limits of the clinical trial, or for example, if you're testing an oral drug and you give the pill to the subject and 5-10 minutes later he throw out everything. Well, that's not possible for the subject to continue in this trial, so that can be another example for termination of participation. The informed consent document must include the following. Also, any additional costs to the research subject that may apply to participate in the trial. You have to add it. And the procedure for ending deliberate participation in the study. This is really important because the subject must know what to do when this study finished. So he has to know who is going to to speak, who is going to, I don't know, to do all the process of the ending of this trial, because sometimes it get confused with abandon the trial. So he has to know exactly how to end this and the consequences of leaving a trial before completion. Also, a commitment must be made up to update the subject on periodic study results that may help the subject decide where to continue or finish their participation in the study. And also the subject must be apprised of the total number of participants involved in the study. So this is another thing that you can add it to your informed consent form. And there's some special studies that may um, if you have this kind of research, well, you have to add it some special statements. For example, the NIH-funded studies must include a description of the certificate of confidentiality. And if you are conducting a genetic research, and if these genetic test results are to be returned to the site or to the subject, you have to add information about the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And for infectious diseases or epidemics, you have to include a statement that the results are required by law to be reported to the health authorities. And when you conduct research that is regulated by a common rule, it is important to include several key statements to ensure that the rights of the subjects are protected. And for example, the first one is a statement that includes and that specifies that the identifiers may be removed from data collected during the study and used for future research without further informed consent. And this is important to ensure that the privacy of the subject is protected and their personal information is not used without their knowledge or consent. Or the alternative for this is include a statement that the collected biological sample cannot be used for future research without the subject explicit consent. And this is particularly important when you're dealing with sensitive information or sensitive data, such as genetic data, for example, to ensure that the subject's privacy is protected. The next statement indicated when the subject's biological sample can be reused commercially. So you have to inform the subject that any potential commercial application of their samples can happen and so he can make an informed decision about whether or not participate in the study. The next statement outlines the conditions under which clinical relevant research results will be disclosed to the subjects. So this is important to ensure that all the participants are aware of the potential benefits and risks of participating in the study and, well, make an informed decisions. And finally, it is important to include a statement indicating whether the investigator will perform genome sequencing, the whole genome sequencing. So this is important to ensure that the subject is aware of any potential risk associated with this type of research and can make an informed decision to participate or not. So by including these key statements in research that is regulated by the common rule, researchers can ensure that they are protecting the rights and privacy of their subjects, and they're conducting ethical research that is in line with industry standards. So there are a lot of points, there are a lot of suggestions and guidelines, and well, a lot of points for any clinical research team can be, well, tedious, can be also, well, I don't know, can be a lot for them. So there are tools that can help you to manage this process, and that is a LIMS. A LIMS helps manage informed consent process, informed consent forms. Let me tell you how. Well, LIMS helps automate and streamline the management of informed consent, and also minimize human errors, and also eliminates ICF tampering risks. And well, clinical LIMS can be integrated with digital tools for the collection of informed consent forms. Let me show you some of the features that a LIMS can help you to manage the informed consent. Well, to manage informed consent of participants, and well, LIMS helps you to track the records of participants who have withdrawn their consent. You can see here that you will have all the general information of the participants, even the genealogy, because sometimes, well, the siblings going to a trial, for example, and you have all their data here in your LIMS, and you can access them really quickly. You have to forget about spreadsheets or paper. No, you have everything here in your LIMS, and also you can attach here their informed consent. Probably they have been participating in several studies, for example. Well, you will have all their informed consent there in a file, so you can access them there well, easily. And LIMS manage all the internal and external documents such as SOPs, records, quality management manuals, and test results probably, and also, well, consent forms. And it tracks the revision history of each document so that the staff members access only the latest version of documents. And it also provides role-based document access right to the staff, providing control access to confidential documents. So with this document management feature, you can control the latest version of the consent forms of the aside from the approval process for each participant. So you can manage the versions of all the informed consent in every study, and you can manage also the approval process. You can see here if you subject didn't sign it, or which one is left to sign, or which one withdraw. Well, you can see everything here in your LIMS. No more paper and no more spreadsheets. Well, this is really, really important because the LIMS anonymize sensitive participant data and assign role-based protect health information access rights to the staff. So the masked data can be viewed only by authorized personnel. And each time an authorized person views or make any changes to the protect health information, the activity is recorded in the audit trail. So this is really useful in audits because sometimes external auditors can be regulatory authorities or sponsors can request a protect health information audit report at any time. So you have it here automatically in your LIMS. In the image you can see that every data that can identify a subject or a participant, well, is encrypted. It's anonymized. You cannot see the name. You cannot see anything that can identify the participant. So it do it automatically. So you make sure that your subjects, well, are protected under sensitive data. And with a good LIMS, you can create a clinical research study and associate participants with it. So you will have everything here in your LIMS. You can create a study, you can create a participant, you can have here all the consent forms, all the SOPs that apply to this study, and the protocols and all the paperwork will be here in your LIMS. I worked in a facility several years ago, and they have all these boxes full of papers of all the consent forms, all the SOPs and records and everything. They were stored in some corner of the facility. And when an auditor came and asked for this information, well, they put out all the boxes and full the tables with paper, and sometimes there are documents missing. And well, you can't forget all with a LIMS because you will have everything here in your in your limbs and electronically and automatically. So we have already seen that informed consent is an integral part of the clinical research. Uh, it lays the foundation for mutual collaboration between the research team and the potential research participants. And we also saw that informed consent must explain to the subjects the purpose of the study, how it will carry out, and the procedures that are involved in the research, and also the risk or benefits. And you have to make sure that they understand it and that it's in a very understandable language, not medical terms or complicated medical terms. So easy language for them. Also, we saw that the informed consent must provide the participation in or withdrawal for clinical research must be voluntary and without coercion, must be in written and obtained from all the potential subjects, whether or not they continue to participate in the research. And well, this makes the management of informed consent an arduous task for any clinical research team. Fortunately, there are tools, there are very, very powerful tools such as LIMS that can help the researchers manage participants' consent with ease. So thank you very much for your attention and don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. I will answer them right away.
Thank you for that insightful presentation, Martha. Attendees, we have launched a short survey. I request you to take a moment to fill out the survey form that you see on your screen. We are now going to begin answering questions. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the chat box. We have received quite a few interesting questions, so let me move straight on to these. The first question we have from the audience is, in what situations might it be appropriate to waive the requirement for informed consent in clinical research? Martha?
Yes, well, that's a great question. And yeah, there are certain situations that it may be appropriate to waive the requirement for informed consent in clinical research. And some of them, where it might be appropriate to waive it, are, for example, when we have emergency research. There are situations when the patient's condition is life threatening and there is no time to obtain this informed consent. So the researchers may be able to proceed with the study without obtaining this consent. So this is known as deferred consent, and the patient or the representative must be informed as soon as possible after the intervention. Another example could be the minimal risk research. So here are some studies that involve, well, as the name says, minimal risk to participants and do not involve any sensitive or identifiable data. So in these situations, well, the informed consent may be waived. So this can include studies that involve the use of anonymous surveys, for example, or retrospective chart reviews. I have another example here that could be the observational research. So here are this in these cases, this observational research may be conducted without this informed consent, as long as it does not involve interventions or collections of identifiable data. And another one that it's will be like the right now we have a lot of experience with this with all the pandemic situation are the public health emergencies. So in this event, such as a pandemic or natural disaster, for example, it may be necessary to waive the requirement for informed consent in order to quickly and efficiently conduct research that could benefit the affected population. And that's the example of the COVID situation. So in that cases, well, the informed consent can be waived.
Thanks for that explanatory answer, Martha. I am quickly going to move to the second question for today, which is how can researchers address concerns about the potential for biases in the informed consent process, such as language barriers or lack of understanding of cultural norms?
Well, that's a very interesting question as well, because research right now it's universal, and in every part of the world, it's continue moving forward. So, um, to address these concerns about potential biases in this informed consent process, well, it's as we saw in the presentation, and as I repeated many many times, it's critical to ensuring that the participants understand the study and the right as participants. So, I will give you some strategies that the researchers can use to address these concerns about the biases in this informed consent. So, you can use culturally appropriate materials. So, you can develop informed consent materials that are tailored to the culture and language of the population being studied. So you can include translating consent forms into multiple languages, using plain language, and incorporating culturally relevant examples. So the participants will understand this very well. And also, well, the most common, I guess, it's employ trained interpreters. So you can use this as trained interpreters to assist with the informed consent process for participants who may have limited English proficiency or who speak different language than than the researcher. That could be anyone. And so it is important to ensure that the interpreters are trained in clinical, in research ethics, and that are impartial. So that's really important. So they can, well, don't be any coercions in the translating. And also, you can use visual aids. So when you are using these visual aids, such as pictures or diagrams, to help explain complex concepts and procedures to participants, well, that's by better understanding if they are graphical, if they are like pictures or some diagrams that can help to the non-English speakers to understand very well, because sometimes there are persons who cannot even read or cannot understand the words very well. Well, pictures help a lot. And well, you must also engage with the community, because to with this, well, you will understand the cultural norms and beliefs that may affect this informed consent process. So this can help you as a researcher to develop an informed consent material that are more appropriate for the community, and you can build trust with these potential participants. And well, another strategy that I suggest is conduct pilot testing. So you can conduct this pilot testing of informed consent materials with members of the target population to identify these areas of confusion or concern, and so that you can refine the materials before beginning any study. And well, you also can consider alternative methods. You can, for obtaining this informed consent, such as a video or audio or something recording for use of interactive media, for example.
Interesting, very interesting. The question as well as the answer, Martha. Thanks
Mhm.
for answering. Next question is one I'm sure you get very often in your interactions. And the question is what is the role of broad consent under the common rule?
Yes, well, that's very often asking this question. But well, let's start for anyone who's not familiarized with this broad consent. I will tell you what it is. Well, this is a type of informed consent that is used in research to obtain consent for the storage, maintenance, and secondary research use of biological specimens or data collected for a specific research project. So, the role of this broad consent under the common rule is to provide a mechanism for obtaining informed consent from participants for the future. Um, because well, their biological samples can be used, or the data in the research. So, under the common rule, the broad consent must meet several criteria. This can be, well, must describe the types of the research that may be conducted using these biological specimens or data, also must identify the types of information that will be collected and how it will be used, and it must describe the risk and benefits of participating in the research, and you have to provide a mechanism for participants to withdraw their consent at any time. So, um, to summarize this, well, the goal of the broad consent is to enable participants to make an informed consent about whether to allow their biological specimens or the data will be used in future research. This happen, well, most times when they are in the storage, for example, in a biobanking, and they're using for different procedures and different research. So, and this use of broad consent can help facilitate all the research by allowing the researchers to access a larger pool of specimens and data for research purpose. I hope this could be understood for everyone.
It is, Martha. Thanks. Next, one of our audience members is asking, what are the best practices for obtaining informed consent from children and adolescents who are participating in medical research or clinical trials? And how can these be balanced with the need to protect their rights and welfare as vulnerable research participants?
Well, another very interesting question, of course, because obtaining these informed consents from children and adolescents who are participating in all this research or clinical trials, well, requires special attention to all their unique needs and vulnerabilities as research participants. So, I will give you some examples of best practices to obtain these informed consents, while balancing the needs to protect their rights and, of course, their welfare, because they are vulnerable patients. So you have to use age appropriate language. So you have to that's can be kind of obvious, but we have to say it here. You have to avoid using medical jargon that may be difficult for children and adolescents to understand. So you have to use age appropriate language. And there is another to obtain the another to there's another point to obtaining the consent of the parent or legal guardian. So researchers should also obtain the assent of the child or adolescent, which means that they understand the nature of the research and they are agree to participate. And well, another thing could be the information sharing. So you should provide children and adolescents with age appropriate information about the research, as I said. So you have to include also the purpose of the study that will be expected of them and any potential risk and benefits. You have to assure their confidentiality. So you have to provide assurance that any personal information collected during the research will be kept this really important. You have to respect for decision making capacity. So the children and adolescents should be respected as individuals with their own decision making capacity, which may vary depending on their age and maturity level. So they have to decide, not the parents, not the tutors. No, they have to understand first and then make a decision informed. And also, you have to ongoing assessment. So you should continually assess the understanding and willingness of children and adolescents to participate in your research and be prepared to modify their approach or seek additional guidance if it's necessary. So here you can use also the pictures or the diagrams to help the kids to understand what are you doing and how it will be benefit him her, their, or other participants of their same age. So you can put it the same level of them. And of course, the ethical considerations. You have to balance the need to protect the rights and welfare of the children as vulnerable research participants with the scientific and ethical requirements of the research. So this may involve also consulting with the ethic committees or institutional review boards and considering alternative approaches to the research design or participant recruitment. So these are some strategies that you can use to check to take all this informed consent from children and adolescents or any patient that is vulnerable.
Thanks, Martha. Those were some enlightening points there. Martha, the next question is about ethical considerations for the reuse of samples. An
Okay.
audience member is asking what are the ethical considerations and challenges involved in obtaining informed consent for the reuse of biological samples in medical research, especially when the original consent was obtained for a different purpose, and how can these be addressed to ensure that individuals' rights and interests are protected?
Well, another interesting question. We have a very good questions here. Well, we know that obtaining this informed consent for the reuse of these samples in medical research, well, raises several ethical considerations and challenges, particularly when the original consent, of course, is for a different purpose. So, some of the key ethical considerations and challenges, I will tell you which of them are the most common. And of course, is the privacy and confidentiality. So, all the participants, have the right to privacy and confidentiality, and the reuse of these samples may increase the risk of a breach of privacy. So that's a very, very huge challenge for the researchers. So they have to take appropriate measures to protect the privacy and the confidentiality of individuals whose samples are being reused. So they have to anonymize any data that could identify the donor, and well, all the best practices to maintain the anonymity of these participants. Another one is the autonomy and control. So the individuals have the right to control their own samples and to make decisions about how they are going to be used or reused. So the researchers must ensure that the individuals are fully informed about the potential future uses of their samples and have the opportunity to give or withhold consent for those uses. So, as we saw in the statements of the common rule, so they can decide at that point on their informed consent form. And well, as we discussed in the webinar, informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical research. But obtain this informed consent for the reuse of biological samples, well, of course, can be challenging, particularly when the original consent was different, right? So the researchers must ensure that the individuals, again, are fully informed about the potential future use of their samples, and of course they have the opportunity to continue or not with their participation. They have to of course they have to decide, they have to choose if they want to continue participating in different trials or not, and the beneficence and non-maleficence. So the researchers have a duty to act in the best interest of the individual and avoid any harm. So they must ensure that the reuse of these samples, is scientifically justified and that any potential risks are minimized. So it requires, of course, careful consideration of ethical principles and a commitment to respecting the rights and interests of individuals. So, by taking these steps, the researchers can ensure that they are conducting research that is both scientifically and ethically responsible. So, that are the key points.
Thank you, Martha. Looks like the next question would be the last one for today. We're approaching the end of the webinar now. The question is about a lens.
Mhm.
Can the LIMS be integrated with the hospital, clinic, or internal database of the users or with the laboratory instruments that I have in my clinical research facility? Someone from the audience is asking.
Okay, yes, yes. A laboratory information management system, a LIMS, can be integrated with the hospital or clinic or internal databases of users. So, and not only that, you can also integrate these LIMS with your laboratory instruments. So, your clinical research facility will be efficiently connected with your LIMS. And well, when you're integrating these LIMS with other systems and instruments, can help you to improve efficiency, and you reduce errors and streamline workflows. That's the most important thing in clinical research right now. So integration with hospital, clinic, or internal databases also allow for seamless transfer of patient information or test results or other data, while integration with laboratory instruments can allow for automated capture and recording of instrument data. So no more errors and mistakes of transfer the data wrong. So this could be automatically. And the specifics of how integrate LIMS with other systems and instruments will depend on the particular LIMS and, of course, the systems that are involved. But most LIMS systems are designed to be configurable and customizable, allowing for integration with a wide range of systems and instruments. So, you have your answer. Yes, it can be possible to integrate the LIMS with this.
Well, thank you for answering that, Martha. And that's a wrap. That is all the time we have for today. Attendees, I'd like to thank all of you for your attention. Thank you, Martha, for the presentation and for answering all the questions from our audience. Attendees, if you have any questions, you can always write to us at support@cloudlens.com. Thank you and have a great day ahead.